It is Wednesday. It's the 30th of July. I'm Moon Gun-young. This is ARIRANG News live from Seoul. Our top stories today. The largest by-elections in Korean history gets underway, the outcome of which will have significant impact on this nation for the next few years. Key point, will the ruling party keep its parliamentary majority, or will it be the main opposition's victory in breaking that majority? Is economic recovery gaining momentum here in Korea? The nation's industrial output grew at the fastest pace in nearly 5 years in June. And the European Union and the United States imposed the strongest sanctions against Russia since the Cold War in an attempt to prevent further destabilization of Ukraine. We'll have those stories and more, but first, it's election day here in Korea. And although the polls today are about replacing lawmakers who no longer have seats in parliament, the heat this time around beats any other elections that may be bigger in size. Well, today's outcome will have a significant impact on Korea's political landscape for years to come. We have team coverage today. First, here's our Ji Myung-kil.
When the final results of today's by-election are in, they could very well show a split down party lines. According to analysis conducted by the rival parties, each side is expected to win in 3 to 4 constituencies, while it's anybody's guess who will take the remaining electoral districts. The ruling party and main opposition party have taken different approaches to appeal to voters. The Conservative Party has been touting its connection to President Park Geun-hye, with candidates pledging economic stimulus packages for their districts. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy has taken aim at the incumbent government, asking voters to hold the ruling party responsible for its perceived poor handling of April's ferry disaster and the ensuing investigation. To win in the most politically important regions, both parties have brought out their big guns. Former opposition leader Ho Nak-gyu is not only hoping to win a seat in the city of Suwon, he's hoping to solidify his position within the opposition bloc. The ruling party's Lee Jung-hyun, a former presidential secretary and key ally of President Park Geun-hye, has taken on the challenge of competing in Jeollanam-do province, a traditional liberal stronghold. A win from Lee would represent a heavy blow to the opposition bloc. Ji Myung-kil, ARIRANG News.
Now, here in the nation's capital, there's just one district that is voting in today's by-election, and that district is considered one of the most significant races. Our Yurian went out to Seoul's Dongjak-B district to hear from the voters.
This district, Dongjak-B in Seoul, is one of the most hotly contested seats in this by-election and has in the past been a major swing region. When looking at the recent local elections, candidates from the ruling Saenuri Party and main opposition party split Dongjak-B, having each won 2 seats. In this district, ruling Saenuri Party candidate Na Kyung-won, who is aiming to become a third-time lawmaker, is taking on minor opposition Justice Party candidate No Tae-chan, who is expected to absorb most of the liberal votes since the opposition camp last week joined forces to field just one candidate. The two were neck and neck in the last opinion polls released last week, showing Na of the ruling party with less than 1 percentage point lead. Now, voters here would like to see the eventual winner make progress in the investigation into April's deadly Seoul ferry disaster.
From the investigation process for Yu Byung-won to the Sewol ferry law, I felt frustrated that the ruling and opposition parties have been unable to come to terms. I voted for someone who could voice their opinions strongly at the National Assembly.
The winning candidate should first focus on revitalizing the local economy. The public is also hurting from the Sewol ferry tragedy. I hope our politicians do their best to relieve us of our pain.
The final turnout is forecast to be in the lower 30% range, the average turnout for by-elections. But higher than expected early voter turnout and the sweltering summer heat could keep some people at home. The National Election Commission expects the final election results to emerge at around 10 p.m. local time, at which time we'll know who the new 15 members of the National Assembly are. Yurian, ARIRANG News.
And we will bring you more updates on the by-elections all throughout the day and well into the night, so stay tuned to ARIRANG. But moving on, Korea's industrial production rose over 2% in June from the previous month, the biggest gain in more than 3 years. But analysts say that's largely because output was too low in May following April's ferry disaster. Our Na Hyun-kyung tells us more.
A 2.1% monthly rise for all industries and a 2.9% jump in the mining and manufacturing sector in production for the month of June. Statistics Korea says those were the biggest gains in more than 3 years and nearly 5 years, respectively. But analysts say it's merely because of a base effect.
June numbers look good because we saw a big drop in May. The indicators for investment and spending are not strong enough for us to see this as momentum for a faster economic recovery.
The rise in the mining and manufacturing sector is attributed to increased output in semiconductors and metal processing, driven by demand from both home and abroad. But investment in plants and equipment went down by 1.4% from May, and spending also only edged up by 0.3%. Although it was the first time the overall monthly output has risen since April's ferry disaster, experts say it's too early to say that the economy is emerging out of its sluggish spending trap. They add it doesn't mean the Korean economy is not improving, but the rate that it's picking up is still pretty slow. Na Hyun-kyung, ARIRANG News.
Well, Korea has enjoyed an exceptional reputation as the global powerhouse in shipbuilding, but its leadership is waning. The country's Chinese competitors are gaining ground fast as their skills are quickly catching up to their very attractive prices. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Korean shipbuilders are struggling as their world market share fell 27% in the first 6 months of this year, a sharp drop from the 40% recorded in 2011, according to data from Seoul-based PS Financial Group. Chinese shipbuilders have filled the gap, benefiting from better price competitiveness. Korea's Hyundai Heavy Industries has been fighting back, trying to boost orders of their so-called eco ships, or ships that come equipped with energy-efficient technology. Korea's Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering has followed a similar course. They're producing mega-sized container ships that use 20% less fuel and emit 30% less carbon. But despite these efforts, China has led the shipbuilding sector since 2012, grabbing a 44% world market share in the first half of this year. Hyundai Heavy Industries recorded an earnings shock in the first quarter of this year with an operating loss of more than $184 million. Hyundai is expected to record operating losses of around $70 million in the second quarter. So the Korean shipbuilding industry is now eyeing new opportunities. A Daewoo Shipbuilding official told Seoul-based Yonhap News that it will put more of an emphasis on its defense-related industries, which include building submarines. Hyundai Heavy completed construction of a new company in the southeastern city of Daegu in May that will begin producing ship engines. Samsung Heavy Industries says it will focus on renewable energy, such as building wind power plants. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Well, domestic demand here in Korea has remained sluggish for a prolonged period of time, so you might be surprised to hear that overseas travel spending by Koreans actually hit a record high in June. Well, data released by the Bank of Korea show that Koreans traveling abroad spent slightly over $1.7 billion last month, breaking the previous record of $1.69 billion set in April. Well, the figure has also led to post a new quarterly record of $5 billion in the April to June period. Experts attribute the spike in overseas spending to the growing number of Koreans traveling abroad for early summer holidays, coupled with the strengthening of the Korean won. Now, speaking of currency, the International Monetary Fund has once again urged South Korea to let the markets determine the foreign exchange rate. The global agency said Wednesday that interference should be limited to avoid excessive volatility that could actually hurt the economy. Well, the call from the IMF, which issued a similar statement at the start of this year, came after Seoul officials conveyed their concerns in recent weeks over the fast pace of the Korean currency's appreciation. During a one-year period up to June, the won gained more than 12% against the greenback. The Monetary Fund also expressed concern about Korea's trade surplus, which accounted for more than 6% of the country's GDP last year, against some 2% seen as optimal. Although they are still number one, Samsung's strong grip on the smartphone market loosened considerably in the second quarter. According to market research firm IDC, the Korean tech giant's share of the global smartphone market slumped to slightly over 25% in the April to June period. Well, that's down about 7.1 percentage points from a year earlier. Now, Samsung's major rival, Apple, also saw its market share dip, but only by about 1 percentage point to 11.9%. Chinese manufacturers, however, are gaining ground very quickly. Huawei was in third place in the second quarter with 6.9% market share, followed by Lenovo at 5.4%.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Moon Gon-young live from Seoul.
Mobile shopping market for the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and Japanese name Sea of Japan in school textbooks in the state of Virginia. Well, biting new sanctions for Russia. The European Union and the United States earlier this morning jointly placed their strongest pressure yet in the form of far-reaching economic sanctions targeting the sectors of energy, banking, and defense on Russia. Our Song Ji-sun has the details.
The European Union and the United States on Tuesday announced further sanctions against Russia in the strongest international action yet over Moscow's support for rebels in eastern Ukraine. In Brussels, the 28-member European bloc agreed to restrictions on the trade of equipment for the oil and defense sectors. Russia's state-run banks will also be barred from raising funds in European capital markets. The move marks the strongest confrontation between Moscow and the West since the end of the Cold War. This latest action was triggered by the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 by what was likely a Russian-supplied missile. Moscow continues to deny the charges. The U.S. also imposed sanctions on Moscow by banning Americans or people in the U.S. from banking with 3 Russian banks. President Obama said if Russia remains on its current path, the costs on Russia will continue to grow, and that the coordinated actions of the U.S. and EU will make the weak Russian economy even weaker. The sanctions could cost Russia some $30 billion this year, according to online media EU Observer. But if Moscow slaps back with similar action, the EU could suffer damage estimated at $55 billion. To mitigate the impact on the European economy, the new sanctions will not affect previous contracts, and Russia's natural gas, which powers European industry and lights its cities, has been spared. Russia is the world's biggest exporter of natural gas and the second biggest exporter of oil. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
Well, speaking of sanctions, this one on North Korea. Washington expects fresh U.S. sanctions against North Korea will be as painful to the leadership there as some very effective sanctions that were slapped on the communist regime back in 2005. The new set of sanctions are aimed at blocking any financial support from the outside world to Pyongyang. Our Park Ji-won reports.
U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce says a new bill that passed the House this week will hit the North Korean leadership hard. In an interview with South Korea's Yonhap News Agency, Royce said the North Korea Sanctions Enforcement Act will be as successful as previous U.S. sanctions on North Korea in 2005, known as the BDA sanctions. The BDA sanctions are considered some of the most effective ever placed on North Korea. They not only froze a key North Korean account at the Banco Delta Asia in Macau, but the measures also forced other financial institutions to pull the plug on their dealings with Pyongyang. The sanctions were lifted later in nuclear negotiations with the North. Royce said the new bill, like the previous BDA sanctions, aims to restrict North Korea's access to international financial institutions by targeting foreign banks to facilitate the North's illicit trading like money laundering and smuggling. The bill has a secondary boycott article which can sanction third country financial institutions or companies for trading with the North in violation of UN resolutions. The U.S. lawmakers stressed, however, that the bill does not affect humanitarian aid to the North. He emphasized the goal of the bill is to block the regime's financial support system. The bill also includes seizing assets linked to North Korea's nuclear proliferation activities, human rights violations, and thorough inspection of North Korean cargo. He also said Japan's independent lifting of some sanctions against the North is counterproductive as the U.S. loses some leverage against North Korea. Royce added the international community needs to move together in terms of imposing sanctions against the North. The bill has to pass the Senate and be signed by President Obama for it to become law. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Now, North Korea has already announced it's sending athletes and cheerleaders to this fall's Asian Games in South Korea, and now they want to send members of their media. Citing an official from the Asian Broadcasting Union, Radio Free Asia reports that Pyongyang asked that 6 North Korean reporters be extended an invitation to cover the sporting event. Well, inter-Korean talks held 2 weeks ago on North Korea's participation in the Asian Games broke down without an agreement, but Pyongyang has since said that it will still move ahead with its plans. The Games open in the South Korean port city of Incheon on September 19th. Frosty relations between Seoul and Tokyo have brought bilateral cooperation to a near standstill at a time when North Korea continues to provoke the international community with missile launches and nuclear threats. A top U.S. military commander has directed a plea at South Korea and Japan to set aside their differences and face the threats out of North Korea together. Connie Kim reports.
The top U.S. military commander in the Pacific says North Korea's nuclear capabilities have reached a serious level.
Their desire for nuclear missiles and nuclear capabilities, as we've said over and over again, are highly threatening to this global security environment.
Admiral Samuel Locklear added that South Korea and Japan should be working in step to curb the North's nuclear development, but that political tensions between the two is affecting America's ability to coordinate with its allies. Locklear said Seoul and Tokyo need to realize the importance of bilateral and trilateral military-to-military cooperation.
They have a common concern, huge common concern with North Korea, and that we encourage them to, both Japan and South Korea, to work together to overcome their political difficulties so that we can work to provide a better security environment in this region.
Historical and territorial disputes between Seoul and Tokyo have dipped bilateral relations to their lowest level in years. Those tensions have kept military cooperation at a minimum, despite repeated provocations from the North. This past weekend, Pyongyang fired off yet another missile into waters off its eastern coast, this just 10 days after the UN Security Council condemned the North for its previous series of missile launches in recent weeks. In the face of the hostilities, South Korean Defense Minister Han Min-gu said yesterday that Seoul and Washington were reviewing various ways to boost their joint combat readiness. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Well, time now for our daily arts and culture segment, and for that, of course, our Im Yoon-hee joins me live in the studio. So let's see what she has in store to help us beat the summer heat. Well, come on in, Yoon-hee.
Good afternoon.
Now, we've been running down some of the most noteworthy summer events lately, and this one today that you've brought us, it looks like you have an event that itself is a classic, a mix of classical music and beautiful landscape.
Right, so this is a music festival that takes place in the beautiful mountains of Gangwon-do province in the city of Pyeongchang, which is also set to host the Winter 2018 Olympics. And so this festival contains some of Korea's top classical musicians, so take a look.
In the beautiful hills of Gangwon-do province, the sound of music fills the air. It's the 11th annual Great Mountains Music Festival and School, held in the rolling mountains of Pyeongchang. Over 50 different acclaimed musicians from all over the world are participating in this year's festival, under the theme Au Soleil Mio. Worldwide distinguished musicians have gathered to share classical pieces that originate from Spain and Italy. But this year's festival also includes a Spanish flamenco dancer and some of Korea's most accomplished musicians.
Because the weather has been so beautiful here, all of our artists were inspired. And of course, we couldn't leave out music from places like Italy and Spain.
You know, I know that this is an annual music festival. I think we covered it last year and the year before that. But you know, in the title, I see that it's a school as well. So tell us more about that.
Right. So this is an excellent program. So these musicians perform, during the evening, but during the day they actually offer classes to students who enroll. And so these students get to spend time in the beautiful hills, beautiful mountains of the Alpensia Resort, and they get to learn from these masters. They get to see their techniques and to spend time with them and then be mentored by them as well. So overall, excellent program for a wonderful musical experience in classical music.
Right, and learning in that beautiful nature, I think that would help as well. And so for those of us who have the week off or whatnot, because it is the peak of the summer vacation season here in Korea, they can go and check out this music festival in Pyeongchang. But what about for those of us who need to, stay in the city and can't leave to other places?
Right, so for people like us who are stuck in Seoul, they are offering a few plays that have just recently opened. And so Taeangro is popular and hotspot for plays. And so you can find pretty much anything there, from encore performances to debut performances. So take a look.
A gay teenager, a school rebel, and a bullied student. These are just a few of the characters you might find at your neighborhood high school. And they're also the main characters on this stage. Desirable Youngster has been brought back for an encore performance due to popular demand. It's a story many can relate to those who have been there and done that, but also to those who are still in the midst of their high school days. Another play taking the stage is the ever so popular Death Trap, one of the most successful comedy thriller plays ever to be shown on Broadway. A strange feud between playwright Sidney Bruhl and his student Clifford results in an interesting turn of events for his wife Myra, one that results in a rather surprising ending for all.
Thriller plays have been receiving much attention these days, but I think it'd be harder for, plays to carry that theme of being a thriller because, with movies you have special effects and sound and post-production instruments that can actually, increase the thriller mood. But for plays, it really needs to be excellent for the audience to actually feel that.
And you know what? They have high expectations for this play, and I'm sure it will be because it's actually the 9th addition to, I don't know if you remember earlier, I brought in actor Kim Soo-do, his project, the Kim Soo-do project. So this is the 9th play that they're adding to this project, and what they aim to do is bring attention to local playwrights as well as attention to plays in general here in Korea. And so an excellent company, they really do produce top-notch performances, and so this one I'm sure will be just as well performed.
Right, and Kim Soo-do project, Kim Soo-do and his crew seem to have picked a very a successful play for their 9th edition.
Right, exactly. And so this performance actually was nominated for the Tony Award, Death Trap. So a very popular performance worldwide. And so here in Korea, it is receiving attention already as a thriller, which most people, like you mentioned earlier, are really getting interested in these days. And so we'll have to see how that turns out.
All right. Well, so for all of us who are away on vacation and for those of us who are stuck in the city, there is so much for everyone to enjoy.
Right. There's so much to enjoy here as well.
All right. Yoonhee, thank you so much for that report, and we will talk to you tomorrow.
See you then.
Good afternoon. We can expect a hotter day today all across the nation, and although it's looking very bright outside, one last bit of the monsoon rain is expected later this afternoon with gusts of winds at times. Now, as the temperatures rises dramatically over the coming hours, it will cause instability in the atmosphere, and that should bring about 5 to 30 millimeters of rain for some regions. And the heat wave advisories are also in effect over some areas in South and in Seoul, and all of these regions will have highs of up to 33 or even higher, so try not to stay out too long and make sure to drink lots of water. Now going over to our temperature readings for today, Seoul will top out at 33 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will peak up to 33 and 31 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops over to 31, Dokdo at 29, while Mangkungang tops to 28. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you, Kanya.
Well, thank you, Michelle, for that. And that's just about all from me at this hour. Check back with us at 4 p.m. Korea time for Business Today.